Okay. I don't know how to open this besides just Ben Shapiro, everybody. Apparently, there is an authoritarian threat posed by the Equality Act. Because when you're in a position of privilege, equality looks like oppression, I guess. Alright, Ben. Come on. We don't need the guest desk here now, right? Ooh. Come on, Ben. Talk to me. Talk fallacies to me.
Okay, so what does the Equality Act actually do? So Ryan Anderson, who has been basically book burned by Amazon, they took down his book When Harry Became Sally, even though it is a well-written, concise, and yes, tolerant book about transgenderism.
When Harry Became Sally is a tolerant book on transgenderism. Anytime I hear somebody say transgenderism, I always have to assume that they are not speaking in good faith. But let's see here. When Harry Became Sally, what is this book? Is it the same as, like, the Irreversible Damage book? Statement on Amazon's removal of When Harry Became Sally. Let's see here. Let's see these tags. First Amendment, academic freedom, art censorship, banned books, banned books week, National Coalition Against Censorship. I feel like we're going to get a very unbiased review here. Amazon has responded to 4 senators who expressed their concern about the removal of When Harry Became Sally from sale. Their letter, they state that Amazon works hard to ensure that customers have a great shopping experience and access to the widest, most diverse cross-section of written and spoken word in retail today. As to the removal of this specific book, the letter states that Amazon has chosen not to sell books that frame LGBTQ identity as a mental illness. Okay, that's fucking fair. I mean, I'm sure that Ben Shapiro would disagree with that, but...
He says over and over and over that people who suffer from gender dysphoria should be treated with the greatest of care, which is absolutely true. It is a semblance of how idiotic our society has become. That we
Wait, okay, so when he says people who suffer from gender dysphoria, we're already framing this in his term. We are already capitulating to his terminology here. Not everybody who's trans suffers from gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is not a prerequisite to becoming trans, because you can be trans by experiencing gender euphoria. Trans just means that you're not cis. If you identify as non-binary, you're trans, because trans is not a word that means transitioning or you are in transition. It just means beyond. You are beyond gender, the gender you were assigned at birth. When Ben says they should be treated with the utmost care, the psychological industry has been arguing shit like this for gay people for the last 100 years, when it was trying to argue that homosexual people need to be treated with the utmost care as they convert them. Merely making a statement like, these people need to be treated with the utmost care, it functionally says nothing. It gives us no information. And apparently the screen is not working now. Why is the screen not working? Let's... Come on, screen. Come on. Turn on. Turn on, screen!
We now say that a man with a mental disorder, namely gender dysphoria, is a woman. Okay, that is not how that works. And yes, it is a mental disorder, according to the DSM-4. Ben! Oh, come on, Ben. You're better than this. You are so much better than this. You could have done better than this in your sleep. Ben Shapiro, who has to argue that it is a mental disorder because the DSM-4 says that it is a mental disorder. Do you know when this video was released? Let's take a look. Ben Shapiro, you released this video on February 26, 2021. So you would have recorded this about 3 or 4 days earlier, because this is part of your podcast. Let's go ahead and do a quick Google search. When did the DSM-5 release? Oh, Ben Shapiro. May 22nd. Okay. Of what year? What year? What year did the DSM-5? 2013. 2013. Ben Shapiro, for you to make this dumb take, for you to make this absolutely stupid take, you would have had, you are necessarily at least 7 years late on the current psychological understanding of what it means to be trans. You are at the very least 7 years late. Wow, Ben. Now, would you like to know why this matters? I did my video on conversion therapy recently, and I found in there that as early as the DSM-3, we were still categorizing certain aspects of being homosexual as a mental illness. We had ego-dystonic homosexuality, I believe it was called. And that was in 3. We understand now that this is not the case, that there is no misfunction for someone being homosexual. But if I were to try to make the case that being a homosexual was indeed a dysfunction of a person, a disease of the mind or some kind of way, the way I would do this would be by referencing old, outdated scientific material that is no longer utilized today to make my point. Then I can say that, no, look at me, I made a citation. I made a citation, guys. That means I'm right. That means I'm right. But it doesn't. Because I made an improper citation on outdated material, which is what Ben Shapiro has done here. But let's continue, Ben. Your complete misunderstanding of what it means to be trans from way back when you were making arguments against trans people per, what, the fucking definition of the Boy Scouts? Come on. Let's see what else you have here.
Gender dysphoria is a mental disorder according to the DSM-5, by the way.
Is it? Is gender dysphoria considered a mental disorder per the DSM-5? Because you first had to go in DSM-4, gender dysphoria, DSM-5. Let's take a look, Ben. The term transgender refers to someone whose sex assigned at birth, i.e. the sex assigned at physical birth, usually based on external genitalia, does not match the gender identity, i.e. one's psychological sense of gender. Some people who are transgender will experience gender dysphoria. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on a second. Hold on. Wait. So when we look at other literature that is referencing the DSM-5, we don't get the argument that Ben is trying to propose to us, that being transgender is a mental disorder. We get that gender dysphoria alone is a problem, but only some people who are transgender experience gender dysphoria. Some people. That means, necessarily, not all. Not everyone who is trans experiences gender dysphoria. Period. But Ben's argument is going to rely on that misunderstanding. But okay, Ben. Let's hear out the rest of this. Go ahead.
It used to be called gender identity dysphoria, the gender identity disorder. Then they renamed it gender dysphoria because they added a requirement in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5, that it's not just that you identify as a member of the opposite sex, it's that it causes you depression, which is the dumbest standard for diagnosing a mental illness ever.
Wait, so hold on. According to Ben, the dumbest standard for identifying a mental illness is that it causes personal suffering? Depression itself is personal suffering. It is mental suffering. Having the argument that a mental illness, it must be an illness because it causes a person to suffer in some way, shape, or form, that's a dumb argument to Ben? Now, I'm curious as to what authority Ben Shapiro thinks he's talking on. I mean, if he would like to go and talk to people who write the DSM-5 and try to push them to change it, it will probably work about as well as what happened when the DSM-2 was being written and people were trying to argue against the DSM-2 slowly working homosexuality out of the mental illness category. The argument then was that people were the people who wrote the DSM were basically capitulating to social justice crowds. And this was back in what, the 40s, the 50s? I could be wrong on my dates, but again, I've got the freaking video on conversion therapy. I'll probably link in the description for anybody who hasn't seen it, where I actually have notes and did the research and did everything scripted out. Working off of my memory is never the best thing in the world. So, Ben, please continue to enlighten me on why the current scientific consensus is wrong, you fucking young earther.
A mental disorder ever. By that standard, if you walk around saying that you are Jesus Christ today, you are not suffering from any sort of mental disorder, unless it also causes you distress to say that.
No, that is not what that means, Ben. You absolute fucking dildo. Speaking of dildos, you can go to ddlgplayground.com, and Ben, if you go to that website, you could definitely get a very nice, rotund, girthy, furry dildo and fuck yourself in the butt with it. Just please use coupon code Suris. No, the word you're looking for that, if somebody was calling themselves Jesus Christ, is a liar. That's the word you're looking for. Now, if you are trying to argue that somebody legitimately believes they are Jesus Christ, the word you're looking for now is delusion, which is covered in current psychiatric material, if you did not know. If they legitimately believed they are Jesus Christ. But if you're just arguing that they merely called themselves Jesus Christ, then I think the word you're looking for is liar. And there's a reason for that. You see, what Ben is trying to do here is he's trying to paint that as analogous to somebody saying they're trans, which means Ben Shapiro's argument basically boils down to, if you are trans, you are a liar. According to Ben. Now, maybe I'm wrong in my assessment of his attempt. Maybe I'm wrong in my assessment of the way that he is constructing this argument, but I don't feel that I am. I don't. But go on, Ben. Educate me.
Okay, that's a ridiculous standard. It doesn't hold by virtually any other definition of...
Does it? Can you demonstrate that, or are you just going to assert it?
A mental disorder, but that is what the pseudoscientists over at the American Psychological Association have to say about all of this in any case.
Oh, okay, so they are pseudoscientists. So you are making the same argument that was made during the adoption of the DSM-3 when people were trying to argue that people were like, the people who write those documents, the people who were writing that were pseudoscientists that were well, they didn't argue they were pseudoscientists at the time. They argued that they were capitulating to some type of woke social justice mob, though certainly not in as many words, as we didn't use that vernacular back then. You're basically arguing that. Ben Shapiro, you are the young earth creationist of psychology. Functionally, right now, what you are doing is engaging in the exact same type of rhetoric that a young earth creationist, quote, scientist does when they are arguing that the earth is 6,000 years old. You're doing the same thing. There's no difference between your argument and that of an anti-vaxxer. But again, I can't wait to hear more of your education.
What exactly does the Equality Act do? So Ryan Anderson writes about this. The Act updates the law Congress passed primarily to combat racism, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and adds sexual orientation and gender identity as protected classes akin to race. So if you have any reservations about gender ideology, as even many progressives do, you'd now be the legal equivalent of Bull Connor, right? To say that men and women exist and that they are separate, and that a man who believes he is a woman is not actually a woman, and that a man who enters a women's locker room with all the male appendages and says he is a woman should not be allowed to do so. This makes you like a 1960s Jim Crow era racist.
Okay, so what he's doing right now is trying to create an absurdist argument. Nobody would hold themselves to this standard, therefore, the left holding them to this standard is absurd. That's the argument that Ben is making here. So let's go ahead and unpack this a little bit. So Ben Shapiro here is arguing that if a man walking into a woman's locker room is a problem, Now, the ways in which he's going to come to that conclusion require a couple of axioms to function with. The underlying assumption is that people are sexual predators, so you have to accept one of two baseline beliefs first. You have to first accept either that all men are rapists, and therefore, like, if you just ignore the trans part of the argument, you just take the argument as he stated, all men are rapists, therefore if a man walks into a shower area or anything where there are women, he will necessarily be compelled to rape them. Therefore, they shouldn't be allowed to. Or, let's go ahead and accept that he's talking about trans people. Now the argument changes from all men are rapists to all trans people are rapists, or all trans people are sexual predators. And in either of these cases, this is obviously absurd. And yes, it does say more about Ben Shapiro than it does about trans people. Now, ignoring all of this, what does the data actually say? What does data say about this? Well, from what, and this is off of memory, maybe I'm wrong, please look this up for yourself. If I am incorrect, please provide citations in the comment section below. But last I checked, when trans people, if a trans woman, this means somebody assigned male at birth, who is trans, who presents as, acts as, identifies as a woman, when they are forced to engage in only male spaces, so the assigned cis spaces that they were in, not their preferred spaces based on their identity, the rate at which they do things like commit suicide go up, and the rate at which they are sexually assaulted goes up. Ben's argument is framed around this need to protect women from potential sexual assault. The end result of that argument statistically is trans people getting assaulted more. Which means, in essence, Ben Shapiro is arguing pro-sexual assault towards trans people. Now, you may disagree with that assessment, but if that is the end result of the rhetoric that he is espousing, and he is vehement in his rhetoric to the point of calling the scientists who functionally operate within the space and have authority where these issues are concerned, when he has to call them pseudoscientists in order to accept his point, I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that that's what he's pushing for here. Arguing that trans people are necessarily sexual predators and wanting the sexual predator behavior to happen to trans people instead. Again, there's always a chance that I'm wrong. Always. But that's the end result of the rhetoric. And that's what it seems like to me. So, Ben, come on, dude. I would say you can do better. And I did say that earlier, but I'm losing faith.
Okay, now, to suggest that the differences between black people and white people are anywhere akin to the differences between men and women is patently crazy.
So no, that's not what's being argued here, Ben. The Equality Act is not arguing that the differences between black and white people are the same as the differences between men and women. The argument in the Equality Act is that one's sexuality and gender identity are as immutable and uncontrollable to the individual as their race. As a result of that immutability, these are protected categories, because these are things that someone cannot help. A trans person cannot help being trans. They do not have the ability to just turn off the switch and say, I'm no longer trans. You don't have a whole lot of compuncture where your identity is concerned, because a lot of actions follow belief, behaviors, many of them follow belief, or are a way to structure your actions post hoc. But the one thing we don't actually have control of is our beliefs. If you believe we have a modicum of control of our beliefs, then please do me a favor and believe right now that Australia doesn't exist. Do it. Become a flat earther today. Not just say it doesn't exist and then operate within that space. I mean, truly, honestly, believe, internalize the idea that Australia doesn't exist. And when you realize that you don't have control over this, a lot of other blocks will start to fall through. Things about being trans, things about what you're attracted to, things about how people act. A lot of this stuff starts to seem a lot more immutable. While we can control actions, I just said how people act, that was a slip of the tongue. While people can control their actions, they cannot control their attractions. They cannot control their identity. They can control what they tell you to call them, but they cannot control the effects of what you call them manifests as. So a trans person who identifies as female but doesn't want to deal with your shit just says, call me Tom, and just says, treat me like a guy. That doesn't mean suddenly that they're a guy. That means they're tired of dealing with your transphobic horseshit, and this is the thing that's more expedient for them to do right now. You could be a family member they can't get away from. You could be a boss at work that has indiscriminate power over you. Any number of reasons. The end result is that their actions do not necessarily entail what their beliefs are. The belief is something that cannot be changed voluntarily. You can expose yourself to information. You can create a scenario in which you are more likely to change your belief, but the change of belief, change of identity, change of any of these things, these immutable characteristics, these are going to be things that are changed on their own, subconsciously, which is why they are protected. Not beliefs per se, but identity.
The differences between black people and white people do not matter. They're essentially skin deep. That is the whole point. The difference between men and women is a lot more than skin deep. It affects
Would you like
nearly
to explain?
every area of intersexual relationships. It affects how men and women develop physically. It affects how men and women develop mentally. There are significant differences in mental development between men and women. Women have advantages in some areas, men have advantages in some areas, but there are major differences.
All right. So let's go ahead and take one of these. We can actually take this argument and turn it into a pro-trans argument. Ben Shapiro argues that developmentally, there is a major difference between a cis man and a cis woman. Okay? I'm willing to accept that. Now, let's take that premise and let's morph it into a pro-trans argument, shall we? That's a thing we can do. Let's have fun with it. So, if we accept the premise that, yes, developmentally, there are characteristics that are ubiquitous for men, ubiquitous for women. If we then accept the premise, which Ben Shapiro doesn't accept, but I do, that people are their identity, and we would rather them not suffer, then we would accept that a child who is growing up, who is a trans child, this is a child who does not identify with their birth sex. We agree that there are some immutable characteristics that are going to be formed as a result of their puberty, developmentally. If we accept Ben Shapiro's premise. And if we do so, we actually also, if we accept that we want to diminish their suffering, this necessarily leads us to wanting trans kids to get treatment, getting trans kids the psychological help that they need, getting trans kids the puberty blockers they need to not undergo completely destructive puberty that hurts their self-identity and makes it that much harder to transition when they are an adult and have the ability to engage in that. If we accept this argument from Ben, that there are immutable characteristics between the two, and that many of these characteristics carry over to development, and we accept our premise that we do not want trans people and trans children to suffer, then we come to the conclusion that we need to be able to do things medically to help trans children so that they can undergo the puberty of their choice, not the puberty that biology is forcing upon them. So this is a fun thing you can do with transphobes, is sometimes you can take their rhetoric, their arguments, and just morph it into something that works better for trans people. It's not always possible, but sometimes it is. As we see with Benny Boy here. We'll get a little bit more of what Ben Shapiro has to say here. Just a little bit more. Come on, Ben. Hit me with the transphobia.
This is all well-established science. There is not a single...
Don't talk about well-established science while calling the people who write the DSM pseudoscientists. Don't do that, Ben.
thing I am saying right now that is conjecture. What is conjecture is the suggestion that sex is completely malleable. What the left has done here.
Wait, Ben, Benny boy. Shapiro, my dude, my duderoni. My guy who I'd like to toss Tabasco in the nostrils of. My friend. We're not talking about sex. We're talking about gender, my dude. Gender. You know, identity. Not sex. Or was that hard for you to understand? Did you not get that? I mean, you claim to be an authority on what the left knows. You even have books written about how to defeat leftists in arguments. But then here you are, talking about sex. When this is about gender. This is sad. This is really sad. Makes me cry. Well, that's okay. We can wipe the tears away. We can be happy. We can be sad. But at the end of the day, we can at least accept the fact that Ben Shapiro doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. He has to reference the DSM-4 because the DSM-5 is apparently written by a bunch of pseudoscientists. According to him. You know. Ben Shapiro, the rhetoric master. Not master of an actual, like, practice. Just about speaking. That said, I think that's as much of his content as we are going to subject ourselves to today. If you enjoyed the video, please let me know. Please hit the like button if you haven't already. And as always, everyone, check the description below if you'd like to support my channel and what I do. And insert end of video tagline here.